Okay, so Sakai is a bad word. No, I'm sorry. That was actually written down on my sheet of paper. I should have crossed that out first. Okay. Sakai is an open source collaborative tool that we're piloting here at Rutgers, primarily for use as a course management system. But Sakai and its development community are positioning Sakai to be a lot more than just a course management system. In fact, the primary goal of Sakai is to handle both collaboration for both instruction and research. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what Sakai is, how it got to Rutgers, who's using it, and some of the ways that Sakai can be used as a collective set of tools to support your research programs. I'll be talking to you for the first, probably third of the talk today, and I'll talk a little bit about the history and the implementation at Rutgers. And then my colleague Tom Grzelak, who's in New Brunswick today, will show some of the features that are specifically good for research. Next slide, please. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so what is Sakai? So most people would say Sakai is an open source course management system. We think Sakai is a lot more than that as the Sakai community. Sakai is really a community-based project. It's also now a foundation that's supporting the development of software. It's good for collaboration, it's good for learning. It has right now a set of tools that is growing about every 6 months. There are new tools being added to the Sakai framework. Next slide, please. Okay, coming up on the screen now are a set of tools that are in the version of Sakai that we're using here at Rutgers right now, which is 2.1.1. As you can see, there are quite a number of them. The tools that are listed, that are shown here in gold, are the tools that Tom will be talking about a little bit later that are particularly good for research. Right now, we are very happy with almost all of the tools that are available in Sakai for use in research and instruction. The tool that we are not at all happy with is called Samigo. It is our quizzes and tests module, and frankly, it is embarrassing how bad it is. But we still have faculty who use it and love it. So we keep moving forward with that particular tool. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the history of Sakai. Sakai, as you could probably guess, was named for the Iron Chef Sakai. Yes. The Iron Chef, the true Iron Chef in the TV show's name is Sakai, and that's a picture of him with some noodles on the right side. It was named Sakai because largely the first version of Sakai was based on a system at the University of Michigan called Chef. So they went from Chef to Sakai. Originally, Sakai was developed by a core group of universities, Michigan, Indiana, MIT, and Stanford. And when they began to develop this, and they announced that they were working on this in about January of 2004, they brought together developers from these universities to develop this core product. The reason that they wanted to develop a community source product like this was the idea that the community would have say and control over what was developed, how it was developed, what its uses could and should be, as opposed to a commercial product where the needs of the commercial entity took precedence over the teaching, learning, and research goals. So Sakai began originally with a $2.4 million grant from the Mellon Foundation. Next slide. Each of the 4 core universities committed at least 5 developers. There were 27 developers when the project began. And there was money from the Mellon Foundation and also from Hewlett-Packard. This went on for about a couple of years. The Mellon grant was a couple of years. And during that period, Sakai developed the Sakai Educational Partners Program, or SEP. Universities were asked to join SEP. The membership fee was $10,000 a year for 3 years commitment. Smaller universities was $5,000 a year. And the idea was that they would have access to all the materials that were being developed by the Sakai core team, some say in the development of future tools, as well as the ability to take tools that they developed and add them into the Sakai framework. Next slide, please. Right now, the Sakai Foundation, which began in January 2006, has about 4 to 6 staff members. Their major role is to coordinate the development of Sakai and its tools throughout the world, not just the nation. We have developers in England, we have developers in Australia who are working on adding tools and making Sakai more stable and more reliable. Right now, the budget for Sakai annually is about $1 million. That's the money that's being brought in by about 100 schools, paying about $10,000 each. And that money is used to pay for the conferences, to pay for the staff, and to pay for whatever they need and can to make this product a success. In less than 2 years, the product has developed such a great reputation that the chief architect of the project was invited to Australia, where he spent a couple of weeks doing nothing but talking to Australian universities about Sakai, because they wanted to know how it could be used, particularly in research in that country. One of the things that the foundation recognizes is that most of the innovation and tool development needs to take place in a distributed manner. A school that has a very strong focus on assessment mechanisms is the perfect place to develop assessment tools for Sakai. A school that has a very visual identity might be the place to develop tools like a whiteboard for Sakai. And so the foundation is looking to all of the schools that are involved with it to develop these tools. Next slide. Right now there's about 105 Sakai members. You can't read the names of the 105 Sakai members because when I stole this slide from Charles Severance, with his permission, to go back to a copyright discussion we had earlier, he basically made the slide so I couldn't change it. So there are 105 members, everything from the Foothills Community College Consortium, which are the University of California's community colleges, to small private schools, to large schools like University of Michigan. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about how Sakai got here and why we were interested in looking at Sakai. For those of you who are at Rutgers, you know that we have Blackboard here in Newark, WebCT in New Brunswick and Camden, eCompanion on all 3 campuses, which is a lot of systems. We recognized that when Newark did its rollout of the Blackboard system, that they did it very effectively, and that the folks in Newark really appreciated both the rollout and the product itself. And so we looked at our WebCT implementation, and particularly in New Brunswick, and we said this was not the most effective way of doing things. And in addition to that, the product that we're using right now is really at the end of its life. And most importantly, the faculty really hate it. So we decided we wanted to look around and see what our other options were. So we looked at the newest versions of Blackboard, the new version of WebCT called WebCT Vista. We looked at eCompanion, we looked at Angel, we looked at Desire to Learn, we looked at Moodle. Moodle is another open source product. And then one of the folks working in our campus instructional technology support group read Campus Technology Magazine and read about Sakai. And she said, oh, this sounds really interesting, let's try this. And so once it was made publicly available, our CTO, who you met earlier, put it on his laptop and he put it on his server and he started playing with it. And he thought that it had enough promise that we then hired some staff and decided we would go forward with a pilot of Sakai. So we first put up a demo copy in the 1.0 or alpha version, I would say. We had about 6 faculty members who were working on the 1.0 version, and they actually liked it. It was easy to use. It was easy for them to develop the courses in. There weren't a lot of features to it, but they had great hope for it. So we decided that we would have a pilot program to really try it out last fall semester. And we figured if we sent out a note to all the faculty at Rutgers, we might get a couple of dozen faculty who are interested in participating in our pilot, which involved answering survey questions and coming to meetings and going to training sessions and things like that. Well, boy, were we surprised. Next slide. 50 faculty members wanted to participate in the pilot. They came from every discipline you can imagine. We had faculty from Camden, we had faculty from New Brunswick interested in participating in the pilot. We ended up by the end of the semester with almost 5,000 students in the pilot. And we had classes up to 1,200 people. That's our Introduction to Chemistry course. That course was 1,200 people in 3 lecture sessions, 29 recitation sections, and 40-something lab sections. It was a huge course. The professor said it was the only way we was going to be able to manage this course was with a tool like Sakai. He's the one, by the way, having trouble with the tests and quizzes mode.
Amen.
So they said, this is easy to use. This is great. Anybody affiliated with Rutgers can set up a site. Student, faculty, staff, all you need is a Rutgers University NetID, and you can set up a site on Sakai. So, next slide. So what we've discovered is people are setting up these sites to do all sorts of things. For credit courses, not for credit courses. There are some dissertation projects that we found online. Research collaborations are here. Class projects, administrative projects, student organization information. And my particular favorite that we discovered last week, there is a faculty member who passed away in Camden a few weeks ago, and someone has set up a memorial site on Sakai for people to enter their comments in the Sakai chat room, which is apparently the most unique use of Sakai anyone has found yet. So what you're seeing in front of you is actually a look at the addition of people into Sakai. It does not represent how many people were actually using Sakai at any given point in time. It is the cumulative number of people who have logged into Sakai from the beginning of the project until now. And we're at about 10,000 people right now, after less than a year. That's about 20% of the student body at Rutgers. Since, you know, a couple hundred are probably faculty, but about 20% of the students at Rutgers have touched Sakai. And if you look at the logs of the help that we've been asked to provide, in 2 semesters we might have had 12 student comments, generally related to logging in because they registered for a class late or something like that. And maybe 10 or 12 faculty members who've had difficult problems because they're trying to do something unique with the system. Because we've been so successful with the pilot, next slide, we've decided to do what we're calling a soft rollout for this fall. When we say soft rollout, what that means is we're not telling anybody we're doing a rollout. We're just doing it quietly. So what you see in front of you is the architecture that we're going to need to support Sakai starting in the fall 2006 semester, particularly because we're expecting a lot of research use of Sakai beginning in fall. This system is scalable and it's enterprise caliber. There'll be 2 environments. There'll be a testing environment and a production environment. The testing environment will have levels for the developers, levels for the instructional designers, and there will be a public test environment for faculty who must get their hands on the newest tools as soon as they're available, and there will be a use-at-your-own-risk service. Those faculty, and we expect that there'll be a good number of those faculty, will largely be on their own. If the tools are stable, they'll have a great time. If the tools aren't stable, we'll pull them back and we'll see what the problem is and try again. So I'm sure you're asking, with this great a system and with all these people, you must have a huge staff to make this happen, right? Next slide. Well, we don't. We have one applications developer. He right now is standing in Camden. So he's not developing today. He's actually participating in the symposium today. We have a systems programmer, administrator, full-time, and we have a piece of another systems programmer administrator who is, by the way, in the room with me today. And we have one instructional designer, one, in our organization, which is the Office of Instructional Research Technology. We are very fortunate to have partnered with the Office of Academic Technology in Newark and the Instructional Designing Technology Group in Camden, where we have other staff who are working with us on the project. We also are fortunate that we have a little bit of time from somebody who works at the Center for Advancement of Teaching in New Brunswick to help us out. Before I pass this over to Tom, I want to let you know a couple of other things. We offer training courses in Sakai, particularly aimed at faculty. So if you have faculty who are interested in getting trained in Sakai, please have them get in touch with me, and my contact information is at the end of the presentation. We prefer to do training for full departments, if we can, as opposed to individuals, because we find having a support system around a faculty member makes it much easier to implement Sakai within their realm. Tom, your turn.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I forgot. Yeah. The first picture was what my staff looked like last week, and the second picture you saw was what they're looking like today. That's pretty much what they look like today.
Animation's a little difficult across video conferencing.
I'm sorry, Tom?
The animation's a little difficult across video conferencing.
Yeah, we'll keep that in mind for the next time. Okay, it's all yours, Tom.
Okay, thanks a lot, Gayle. For those of you who may know, for the better part of the last 9 years, I've been supporting my team and research here at Rutgers University. And my involvement initially in the Sakai effort here within our group was more indirect. You know, as Gayle described previously, we had a course management system pilot going on. We also had, we were looking at the aspects of that, you know, as a possible replacement to WebCT. Now, the more exposure, though, that I had to the group that was doing this piloting and looking at this, the more I started to realize that some of those tools that they've incorporated into Sakai could actually use for research, or actually had an aspect to them that could be used in research. I started thinking back to the faculty in my former department who would ask me occasionally for things like special access websites where they could have researchers outside the university get access to login control and that. Mailing lists for their research groups, guest logins to specific areas, discussion groups, bulletin boards, all these special requests, those could be facilitated within Sakai. So now all of a sudden we started having a tool where I could have an entire set of research collaboration issues addressed. And also, we learned that Sakai also had the right direction. They were looking at not only courses, but they were also looking at the research application and therefore some crossover in between the two. So I was particularly impressed by that. When I looked at Sakai and tried to break down what I thought would be probably particularly attractive to researchers, I came up with a couple of different general aspects. Number one, the open source, open license part of that. It's easy to see that if you have a community-supported environment where tools are being developed, you're probably far more likely to get the tools that you need developed for your particular area or for your emphasis over a commercial system. Okay? In other words, the focus is more, I feel, and this is my opinion, more on you and on the research, not necessarily on the commercial aspects of the product. One of the lessons that we learned from the pilot is that faculty and students pretty much found the interface to be fairly intuitive, fairly easy to use. And that's a big deal because we have such a huge staff, and that it's, you know, we have to be able to have some ways to support it. So if we had a complicated system that required a lot of interaction between staff and people designing courses, students who are using the courses, who are using the tools, that was going to be a problem. And we really didn't see that during the pilot. And I was particularly impressed with that. So that made it, in my mind, once again, and it, you know, very, very applicable to, you know, branching out into the research area. It also kept in line with the topic of today, the idea of cyber infrastructure, expanding your collaborative environment beyond your research group, whether it's in your department, interdepartmental, university level, national, international. You have that capability. One of the nice things about Sakai is that you can control access in, and you can have and set up accounts for people to come in that are not part of the university. And that's something that's a very powerful aspect of it. But, you know, another aspect is that you're using this, if you start using this in your classroom and you're using it in your research side, how easy it is to start developing ways to interconnect the two. You know, there's an emphasis at Rutgers University on undergraduate research. If you're using a course management system and the same tools and you're using them within your research group, you can start blending those tools and actually find ways to get your students into, at least to understand what goes on in the research aspects of what you do. So what I wanted to do with today's particular talk is step through some of those tools that I said, hey, yes, I can see a way that this tool can be used in a research capacity. And you know, step through Sakai and look at the tools, and that I think will actually could help you out in your research area. Okay.
Tom, small question, or you want questions after?
Gary, you can ask a question now.
If I want to put some information on Sakai, so where this information will be stored?
Stored on
at local disk or on Sakai?
On Sakai.
On Sakai.
On Sakai. So in other words, it's you're moving data and it will be stored on there. Exactly. And we can talk about that when we get to aspects of file storage and things like that. We'll make sure that I cover that. Okay. Well, one of the things that I did to start looking at this project, or at least at this aspect, is I created a site, just like you can as well. Created a site on Sakai called the Research Demo Site. Now, this is a site that's joinable by everyone. And you can use that to go, so you can go ahead, log on to Sakai, and up in the front here you see the basic front page interface. If you went to sakai.rutgers.edu, you have a login, use your NetID and your NetID password, and you log in, and what you do is you go to membership, and you click on joinable sites, and look down through the list till you come across it's a research demo site. And you can join that, and you can take a look at all the tools and arrangements that I described today are going to be listed in there. As I said before, you can use your NetID here. If you have collaborators that are outside the university, you can create accounts. You can control access to your site. You can make it publicly joinable by anybody if it's a public site, or you can lock it down to specific people within your research group. Okay, and you can keep the content protected in that way.
Were security concerns taken into account with granting accounts to non-Rutgers people? In other words, there's no security risk involved in giving people access. Is it isolated?
The security layers is something that clearly has to be more well understood and defined. Basically, if you make your sites joinable right now by anybody with a NetID, or by anybody, when you say make this publicly joinable, everyone who already has an established account on Sakai, as well as everyone at the university who has a NetID, can join your site. Now you have the ability to look, as a site maintainer, you have the ability to go in there and look who's joined your site, and you can block their access. Okay? But they potentially could join the site off the bat, and if you're not looking at that, potentially you could have people on there. What I would recommend is if you have content on a site that you want to restrict access to, go ahead and close that site down and then just declare who you want to have access to the site. And then you have that security. Okay. Once you go ahead and you join the research demo site, it will become a tab at the top of your Sakai homepage. This next slide shows, it'll come up here in a second, shows the basic layout. I understand that the lettering is probably not clear on all the different sites, but it shows the basic layout of what your homepage would be if you logged into the research demo site. You have content on the left-hand side, menu items for the different tools that we'll be discussing today. You have an initial homepage area where we have it set up right now where you get worksite information, You have an announcements tool, which we'll talk about. So you list the most recent announcements and also things going on in the chat room, which is another tool we'll talk about there. You can arrange this. And what's nice about what we do here with Sakai at Rutgers is that using a tool called Site Editor, you can control the content of these screens. You can control where the layout of them, what tools are brought up, what the menu items are on the left-hand side. In other words, I have an area here where it uses a discussion tool or a bulletin board. So instead of calling it discussion tool, I called it, this was Dr. Rutgers lab discussion. You know, something you can personalize and make sure that the students know what it is. Some of the default names of some of the tools are pretty hard to understand what they really are. So you can go ahead with the site editor tool, go ahead and edit those tools to reflect what you really want it to look like. And you can arrange them up or down in the menu tree. And it's something that makes your site a little bit more useful to you. Okay, what I wanted to do now is look at the first tool, the announcements tool. Okay, this is a tool where you can go ahead and you can post announcements. You know, you get a headline, you get content, you can give things priorities, you can give people permissions, you can add and delete, and then those announcements get added to the front page. And when the student logs into the site, then goes to the research demos tab or your site demos or site tab, and looks at the announcement tool or looks at the front page. They see those announcements. So in other words, you have that way of contacting and working with them. It's a good basic tool, you know, understanding of how a tool works in Sakai. You have all these different features. You have permissions for what can be added, deleted, modified by the people in your lab, and then and how you can possibly use that with your research group. The next tool is actually a pretty powerful one. I think you really like this one. Now, one thing that you really have to understand here is that once you have a Sakai site, you can go anywhere and log into sakai.rutgers.edu and get access to your site. You're not necessarily have to be at the Rutgers campus. You don't have to be within the Rutgers domain. You can be at your house, conference, wherever, doing a presentation, on sabbatical, etc., and still have access back into the documents, the features, and the things that you set up with your particular site. That's the nice aspect about it. Okay, so one of those tools that really exploits that is this idea of having a repository. Okay, so what you do is you have disk space on Sakai where you can create folders and start organizing PowerPoint presentations, publications that you have working with the students in your research group, maybe lab analysis results, maybe some imagery that you've done, things along that line. Maybe you're working up toward a conference and you have all your students working on the posters and they keep all the content here, keep the posters here, and working back and forth. But you can go ahead and arrange that. And then you have your research group, all their documents stored in Sakai. And wherever you are, you can gain access to those. Go ahead.
We've used this in the libraries for some of our committees, and it gets crazy because everybody's posting everything rather than having smaller working groups within the committee. Does Sakai currently have that ability to have just smaller groups within that group, which would also be helpful for classroom work?
I believe so. We'd have to ask if there's a group that there's a new tool for doing sectioning, which it would be interesting to see whether we can actually do groups within.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, you can. Yeah, so I think you can establish groups within, and then you can control the content there and have an overlying site. But one of the Gayle, go ahead, Gayle. Gotta turn it up. I'm sorry, Gayle. Hold on 1 second.
Doing there, Tom?
What? We had to turn it down. Sorry.
Okay. When someone asks a question, Nebraska, can you repeat it for us, please?
Okay. Do you want me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Okay. I apologize. I should know that. One of the question was that sometimes if you get a large group that has a site on Sakai or a site in one of these repositories, if you start to get a lot of content in there, it starts getting very haywire. In other words, you need a way to go ahead and break it down amongst groups to get some sort of level of organization. Can you subsection out a Sakai site? And I believe that you can do that with a section. Do you agree with that, Gayle?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You can also do it by defining groups within like JForm and.
Okay. Yeah, we can do it with data. We'll talk about that too. Gayle, if you could, I think it might be your site, if you could mute your mic, and I think a lot of echo back and forth. See if that helps. Is that better?
I muted and it got worse.
Okay. Okay, we'll just lower it here. All right. So one of the other aspects of this is that you can use a tool within Sakai called WebDAV to be able to make this a folder that sits on your desktop. Okay. So in other words, you don't necessarily have to go in and work on papers inside this environment. You can actually make it where it's a folder that sits on your desktop, and then you can go in there just like you would go into a My Documents folder or something along those lines, and then you can work on those documents, and it will handle the communication back and forth through HTTP. So you can, once again, do that from within the conference center. You don't have to worry about firewalls, VPNs, things like that. You'll have access to your files, and you can work on those iteratively with your group members. So it's a nice feature within Sakai, and definitely one where if you have a distributed working group and you want to work on a paper at work and bring it home, you don't have to worry about VPNing back into the university to be able to tunnel into your Windows server to be able to handle that, which used to be an old problem. I set up a tool here called Project Timeline. This could be any project here, but what I did was went into the site editor and pulled in two tools. A syllabus tool, which I'm using for announcements here, but it could be another announcements tool, and also a calendar. So let's say you had a project going on that you wanted to have a specific workflow where you're assigning people tasks, assigning people work schedules. Let's say you're going to do a 3-week observational project somewhere in New Jersey, and you wanted to have a list on the right-hand side of specific things that you want to do during that project, make sure people are keeping up to date with that in the calendar and go back and forth. You can start seeing where you can design Sakai to help you out by even merging tools together into a common screen so that you can go ahead and accomplish whatever the goals of that particular project are. Okay, Sakai also has a chat tool. Everyone who has students who instant message back and forth understand the power of chat. Sometimes the kids in my house chat to each other rather than talk to each other. So people use the chat tool. There's a chat tool within Sakai. You saw it on the front page where it lists what the last chat sessions were about. This is archived chat, so in other words, you can go back over a period of time and take a look at what was being said in the chat room, questions that were being answered. Let's say you are at that conference and you need to interact with members of your research lab on a particular issue. You could sit there and chat within Sakai back and forth with them to make sure that they're doing what they need to be doing that particular day. Okay?
Are there any plans for voice over IP instead of just chat?
The question is, are there any plans for voice over IP instead of chat? And the answer is yes. And I'll get that under future tools and discuss a little bit about that. Any questions on the chat tool? It's pretty much a basic chat back and forth. For anyone who's done instant messaging understands how this would work and how it could be beneficial to you.
That includes putting image files.
I'm not sure you can place image files on here. You do get one aspect you get with this is you get presence, just like you get presence. Then you know who's in the chat room right now. You can see, obviously you see an archive of what's being done, but I'm not sure. You might be able to do.
It's pretty limited to text and simple like smileys and things like that, but you really can't do graphics. You can post links to websites that have graphics.
Don, could you turn up the volume just in case Gayle says anything?
I have low here.
Right.
Because Gayle's going to chime in here if she can answer any of these questions. I don't get it. Gayle, did you catch that question that was just asked?
I missed the second part of the question. The first part of the question about images.
Right, can you add images to chat?
Right, right now you can't add images to chat, but you can set up a discussion forum where you can add images now.
Okay, yeah, we'll talk about that.
And by the way, Tom, Bill is in Camden. He can help answer questions too.
We get Bill along. Okay, well that was a good segue into the JForum discussion tool. Okay, this is a bulletin board, a fairly popular bulletin board amongst probably your students or even yourselves. It's been incorporated into the last release of Sakai, and it's actually very nice. You can go ahead and come into here, and you can set up forums on specific topics. I set up a couple of forum topics. One being field project that we have going on here. Another one on lab safety and training, right to know training here at Rutgers, etc. Another one maybe lab supplies and ordering. Who's going, when we need this chemical or we need this supply, let's make sure we add it into that form so we can go back and go through there. A student lounge area to go ahead and just ask questions and talk amongst themselves. Strength of this, once again, you have it's the full-fledged JForum discussion tool. You have the ability to archive this. You see the archives, you can refer back to it, and use it. It works the same way of your profiles, your avatars. You can set up, you put imagery in here as well, which is one of the other things that we had before. Okay, one of the other things that I wanted to mention was the ability, when you create a site in Sakai, you can add a tool called Email Archive, which will assign an email address to your Sakai group. Okay? The nice thing about that is that you can immediately send email to that email address, and you're sending it to all group members. Okay? The advantage of this over setting up your own mail list is that you have a central place where you can go in and look back in the archives of what was sent out to the groups. And you can go ahead and be able to search on that. You have a central archive of all the emails that were sent to that particular address, which is something that I always said, did somebody sent that through an email, and did you see that? Do you remember seeing something about that and you deleted it, or someone who's supposed to be archiving it wasn't doing it, or whatever? But you can go ahead and have them for your group, a readily accessible single archive of all the email discussions that go on with the group using the mail list, which is a very nice feature. You also have the ability within Sakai to go ahead and add websites, RSS feeds. Now, you as faculty, as researchers, and you want your research groups to look routinely at particular websites or particular e-zines or news services or whatever that are particular to your research interests. A great way of doing this, going ahead and configuring these tools to go ahead and pull that content into the site. So they only need to click on one link, and they get to the site. You may want them to go to the American Chemical Society's webpage, chemistry.org, go out and read the headlines each week. You could possibly have them do that. Journals, things along that line.
Another question, sorry. Does it support podcasts?
I would say, Gayle, the question is, does it support podcasts? As podcasts, specifically as a podcast, or is it just another file? As a file, it would be fine. You can go up there and you can download the file. Don, is Gayle saying? Gayle, is there a specific podcast built into Sakai other than just files, right?
Not at this moment, but it will be there.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think you can use for the driving will have something that would be more than just here's the podcast file sitting out there. You can integrate. There'll be some level of integration. It's just beginning. So you can go ahead and you can have websites like this, or you can have RSS feeds. RSS stands for Radio Simple Syndication. If you go to any of the news services, they have RSS feeds, which will send you text with links back to news articles without necessarily having to bring back the whole site to your references. It's the easiest way to manage the information.
Bill has something to say?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, going back to the podcasting for just a second. I know that University of Michigan is working on an iTunes integration component. I suspect we're going to be making that available, and since there is work with iTunes and Rutgers going on at this point, I suspect that we'll have some sort of support for podcasting through that service. In terms of just setting your own XML feed up, I think Joe Delaney from the Center for Advancement of Teaching has been doing some experimentation, but I don't know how straightforward it is at this point. We are working to make it a very easy thing, though.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Okay, the next slide, I just wanted to briefly touch upon when you create a site, you become a site manager. You can grant other senior people in your research group management rights to your Sakai site. And what you'll have access to is a site management tool. And you'll be able to go in there and add users. This is a screen where you would go in and add tools, remove tools, change site information, add people in there, manage groups and subgroups like we were talking about before. Import data from other sites that you may want to use here. So in other words, you don't have to develop a tool in 3 different sites. You can develop it in one and then have it imported into this site here and manage that way. So you have different layers. You can come in here and see there were 3 people that had logged on to the research demo site as we were testing it. But I can go ahead and determine what their access status level or their status is within there, whether they're active or inactive, or whether they maintain the site or just simply have access to it. So you have that level of configuration in there as well. Okay, those were, hopefully I was able to convey to you at least some of the basic tools that are within Sakai today, the implementation that's at Rutgers University, what those tools are and how they can be used to help support some of the collaborative aspects of some of your research programs. What I want to do now is kind of talk a little bit about some of the larger picture aspects of Sakai and some of the future development areas. There's a series of tools that are under development within Sakai for future releases, and those are a blog tool, web blog tool, be able to share your display amongst particular people who are logged into the Sakai site at the same time. The ability to have a shared whiteboard and work with it that way. I can imagine this is where people who want to write down chemical equations can go and argue back and forth amongst themselves. You can't do that with a typewriter, but you can do it with a tablet and a stylus and a shared whiteboard. Getting back to your question before about, well, is voice over IP going to follow chat? Well, voice over IP or just multi-point audio and video. So basically, basic video conferencing tools are envisioned for future releases of Sakai, and to add to the general collaborative aspects of the package. They're also looking at right now involving open source portfolio, which is portfolio development where you can put material for your entire career into a particular portfolio and take it with you. So you develop, like an artist who develop a portfolio, they're looking at having students through their careers, through their professional careers, be able to maintain these portfolios of all their scientific accomplishments and carry that with them. So that's one of the tools that's looking to be involved. And then something called the Sakai Library, which is basically an interface into digital repository that's being developed with the libraries. And this is Twin Peaks, but I believe it also has something to do with Dora as well. These are tools that are on the horizon, are in development, and you've seen the architecture before. What will happen is that they'll get released, they'll go through our testing levels, and then put onto the leading edge server for faculty to try, and then they'll get put into production if they need to do that entire process. Okay, go ahead.
Another question. Has there been any interest in virtual office hours?
Virtual office hours.
Repeat the question.
Yeah, I think that
Through Sakai?
Repeat the question.
Oh, the question was, is there any interest in virtual office hours?
Some of my presentation instructors are already using virtual office hours in chemistry.
And basically the
Using
comment
the
was,
chat?
Yeah,
that
using chat.
people in Sakai are already using Sakai as a tool to hold virtual office hours. And it would only be natural, right? Okay.
One of the advantages of Sakai is that you can use it for virtual office hours for group or for individual. So you can actually have a group session where you go over problems and everyone who logs in during a particular time period can watch you do it so that you're not repeating over and over again the same material.
One of the things that attracted me to Sakai and the direction that it was going in supporting research was the idea that Sakai could potentially act as a front end to develop tools that are used to support particular research groups. And that intrigued me because, okay, I have these basic tools, but I also have this, maybe I have this visualization tool that I want to be able to use within Sakai to look at the imagery that's important to my area of research, as well as have, you know, a discussion group and a chat tool and announcements, etc., things like that. Well, we're certainly looking at that here at Rutgers, but you know, one of the realities of the situation is that we have a very limited staff, and we're actually looking at what we're going to do is we're going to use something called web services. Now, web services is a standard web technology. It sounds generic, but it actually is a standard web technology which allows us to integrate applications or bridge an application between the Sakai interface and the application itself without necessarily marrying the two together. Because if we marry the two together, every time Sakai changes, the tool has to change, and it's just an extreme amount of effort into that. So what we're looking for is to use web services to go ahead and to bridge between some of these tools that faculty have, that faculty have been using for quite a while, and to be able to incorporate that into Sakai to make it a little bit more real for what you need it to do. What we're doing with that is, as getting back to the theme of the soft rollout, we're putting feelers out there, looking at different groups, and promoting the idea that if there's a particular tool that you want to use to make, you like Sakai, but it only does 60% of what you need to do, you would love it if you had this tool, which has been your tool that's helped you in your research group. We would love to see that being able to be incorporated into Sakai. Talk to us. At least we want, if nothing else, if we can actually help you do the work and actually figure out how to get it using web services incorporated and bridged into Sakai, at least we need to know about what you want to do with it so that we're putting the right effort and in the right direction within Sakai. And we know that you're out there wanting to do this.
Another question.
Okay.
Some of the other learning management systems are compatible with macromedia products, so that if you test in a macromedia product, it can go into the learning management system. Now, I understand there's problems with this now, but is that something that you would use a bridge for?
The question is, in some of the existing learning management systems, they have tools which, if you develop an application within a macromedia product, you can go ahead and use a macromedia bridge into the learning system. Is this the kind of thing? And I believe, yes, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. But web service is more generic than just saying you have to develop a tool in macromedia in order to have it used in this particular learning system. But you know, there's a significant amount of effort that has to be expended in order to do that, and with limited staff. You know, we certainly want to know about the opportunities that we have out there, and the things that people want to do, so that we can put the effort where it needs to go. Okay, and we're going to end here today with. I hope I was able to give you an appreciation for what Sakai at Rutgers is doing and how it can help support your particular research group. We really want you to encourage you, if you haven't already, to join the 20% of the university that already has, to go ahead, log on, create a site, log in, join the research demo site, look at the tools that I described to you today, and also, and most importantly, tell us what you thought. What has your experience been with Sakai? Do you like the interface? Do you not like the interface? What do you like about it? What don't you like about the tools? What are some of the things that you would like to see available within Sakai? And basically, you know, Sakai at Rutgers is going to be what you make it. So we need to hear about that. If you run into issues using Sakai, the best way to go ahead and email sakai@rutgers.edu those issues. If you see a way that you want to use Sakai in a particularly innovative way, talking about the web services, using web services to incorporate a tool or bridge a tool into Sakai, please either email myself or Gayle Stein, and we'll be happy to talk to you about that and more of what you wanted to do. At this point, if anyone has any more questions, we'd be happy to take those now.
Tom, we have a question here in Newark.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just curious, can you give collaborators who don't have a net ID access to your site? Can you set up accounts?
Yes. You can't give them a net ID, but you can give them an account into Sakai.
Is that once a person with a net ID starts a site, they can add anybody in the world to that site. They can give that person access, or they can actually have that person act as a maintainer and add material themselves and take that themselves.
You have like a guest account where you can just view things.
I would probably
It's a Sakai account.
have access to the information, but they just wouldn't do it. Any more questions here? No more questions here in Newark, Tom?
Okay.
I have some questions here in Camden.
Excellent. Go ahead.
Okay. Originally, I guess Gayle was talking about the original rollout. There were 50 faculty with 5,000 students. And I guess the system that you're talking about right now for the research that you're describing this, is that all on the same servers, the same system?
Exactly. Exactly. Same system. And that's one of the beauties of this whole thing, is that you can go ahead and set up your research library site, your research area on Sakai, and it's the same area where you have your courses. So you go to one site, you can manage both aspects, or you can find ways to bridge to it. And something that you may want to bring into the classroom that's just working on your research area.
Okay, so I guess my question is, following up on that then, as far as the classes that were arranged for the courses and the setup for that, I know that there's a lot of capability by giving the users that ability that make their site. But for the course management side, was there something integrated into your central accounts to say that these were the students that were signed up for this course?
Yes.
And automatically did that?
Yes.
It was automated?
Yes.
Yes.
We have a direct link into the course roster system. So if you teach in a course, what you would do is when you log in, you would get a list of the courses you have access to. You would select your course, and the roster would automatically dump in, and then would be updated every time the roster was updated. So as students came into and left your course, the roster in Sakai would change.
And you're saying that still the faculty have the opportunity then to control that at that level to let other people from the outside or to take people out?
Yes.
And then I guess one other question about, did you set up BIS quotas for people for setting up the courses or for the research? Did you have specific quotas that were given to people?
We have that set up for us right now. But we're watching very closely.
I'd like to jump in with one more question from Camden, and if you answered this before I came in, I apologize for asking. If you just looked at the research users that are using Sakai for the sorts of things you were talking about, are they coming predominantly from certain disciplines, or is it across the board, social sciences, physical sciences, so on?
There's not enough to get a particular trend. there's only about half a dozen, so maybe a dozen research sites that we're not sure how active they are. Haven't drilled into each of them sites to look at what the site was set up and what they site information set about. But it doesn't look like it's particularly computer science. It's got 14 sites and 15 that are there. They're more spread out than that.
Remind the folks in Camden that if you have Sakai questions, you might want to start by talking to Emily Kors, who can help you with them. And if you're in Newark, you can talk with Joy McDonald, and she'll be happy to do the first line of help. And whatever either of them can handle, they'll pass on to us.
Actually, we're from Delaware, so I don't think they're going to want to help us.
No, you can ask Emily anyway.
Just gonna ask you.
Just don't ask you.
Last thing I want to remind everyone that there's a wrap-up session in the multi-purpose room or the executive meeting room or the other multi-purpose room when we're done today. Please fill out your blue or yellow form and either drop it off with the facilitator in the room where you are now or on the registration table. And we thank you very much for attending our symposium. Please don't hesitate to contact us if you have more questions.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot. Basically, this ends the symposium. Instead of having everybody necessarily go back, you're free to go back to the center area.
Charles.